So this week in the Sacred Gathering, and actually the next few weeks in our time together, we're going to continue looking at the Sermon on the Mount. One, because I just think it's one of my favorite parts of the Bible. I think it just illustrates really well what Jesus is all about, and therefore what God is all about. And so we started last week with the Beatitudes, and we're going to continue the next few weeks looking at kind of big sections. Yeah, you can spend a ton of time really digging into kind of the minutia that's in here, but we'll do kind of a broad strokes version of the Sermon on the Mount to kind of pull out some things, and hopefully we can all be encouraged to spend some more time with God in that sermon and really examining our lives through its lens the weeks after that. So I talked real briefly last week about how the Sermon on the Mount and the way Matthew presents it in his gospel is very much like a new Moses, like him coming down off the mountain to provide a new law. This paralleling the Old Testament law, the Torah, the set of teachings and rhythms and liturgies. And all the other stuff's in there that is going to identify God's people as a unique people set out for the sake of representing God and blessing him to the rest of the world, to teach what God is all about, right? And so Jesus goes up on a mountain and is bringing God's law yet again. So that's how I'm saying Matthew is presenting Jesus as this kind of new Moses, this new set of laws. Now, the word law, I think, might be a little problematic, not because that's not what they would have understood both Jesus to be doing and Moses to be doing, but I think our specific way of practicing the law nowadays kind of taints the way we're going to maybe approach this, and in some ways not the most helpful way. So in the law, most of the time, what we're trying to define is kind of a set of rigid lines. And, if you're on this side of the law, you have not broken the law. But when you do this thing, when you cross that line, you have suddenly broken the law. And of course, what lawyers and judges and many other people in the justice system are trying to do is determine, has the law been broken or not? Is someone wrong here or someone right here? And I think that approach of where are the lines and how when have we crossed the line, when have we not crossed the line, is the way a lot of people approach religion. Right? It's a set of moral standards. And that you just got to figure out where the lines are, where the laws are. And this mentality was really, strong in Jesus' day. They were very religious. There were many people, including lawyers, who were kind of considered the religious elite. They were the best of the best, the hardest working. And yet Jesus butted heads with them almost constantly. The kind of question being, you know the law, but you don't really know God. And so I think one of the things he's doing here is, yes, teaching a kind of new set of rhythms, a new way of being in the world, but I don't think the law is the best way. Jesus is not just saying, where are the lines? I'm going to redraw the lines slightly. Here's what God is all about. He's showing a completely new attitude. He's showing a completely new way of doing it. And so, as we're going to see in this next section, what he does a few times is says, well, you've read this, so there's the line, right? But I say this. He's not just moving the line to make it harder. He is, I think, teaching us kind of the heart behind a lot of these laws. Jesus is trying to get away from that. Let's just draw the line. On this side I'm right, on this side I'm wrong, but teach what it is that God is actually intending in teaching that law in the first place. And so a helpful comment that I ran into this week was maybe the Sermon on the Mount should be approached more as a lover would approach something than a lawyer. And what I mean by that is, if you are in love with somebody and say Valentine's Day is coming up, we don't look at it in that same way and say, okay, well, here's the line. Valentine's Day is coming up. I better buy a flower because that's what a good lover does right now, right? Someone who is just crazy about someone else, who's interested in them and wants the best for them, is going to want to personalize this in some way, shape, or form. Maybe they don't like being told, this is the times I have to express my love, because I want to express it my own way. I want to express it in a way that makes sense to them and will bring them deep joy. I want to express my love for them. And so, just looking at this, like, here is the line, and I'm not going to go beyond that. Or, here's the check mark, kind of the clerk's approach, right? It just doesn't really cut it for a lover. This is someone, when you adore someone, you want what's best. And I think if we approach the Sermon on the Mount in that way, that we love God, we want to be about the sorts of things God is about, figuring out where the line is and making sure we check off that box. Yes, I loved people. Yes, I didn't murder anyone, etc. Right? It just doesn't really get it. I think continuing that metaphor, I think my wife Holly is not going to be particularly proud of me if I say, "Oh, how can you show me that you love me?" And my response is, "Well, I didn't commit adultery today." Like, congratulations, you didn't cross the line. You didn't do the bare minimum. That's not an expression of love. And so I think that attitude is going to kind of haunt the entire Sermon on the Mount, particularly the section we're going to look at today. So again, the overall structure of the Sermon on the Mount that I wanted to look at comes from, I think, a different metaphor. Yes, this metaphor of a lover, but what Jesus is actually trying to do here is show the kinds of people he's wanting us to become. And the metaphor there is maybe that of an apprentice, right? I don't think it's any accident that the story right before this is Jesus picking out apostles or disciples, or I think a better translation is an apprentice, right? A group of people that are going to learn from him, a group of people that are going to learn his ways and then pass that on to new people, and then pass that on to new people. Again, Jesus did not go around writing a book, writing a bunch of teachings. He spent time with people. He showed them what God was about, what God valued. He trained them in a set of kind of skills and beliefs. And then they only started writing these things down as these original guys were dying off, and people didn't want to lose some of these experiences that they had had with Jesus. But the plan all along is not to write this thing down and for us to nitpick it like lawyers. This is passing on a story. But the expectation for both the Sermon on the Mount and all of Jesus' teachings, and I would go so far to say all of the Bible, is that we are apprenticing to those who've gone before us. We are learning from them. We are reading these things together. We're trying to figure out what they look like in this day and time. All these years later, half a world away, all these cultural changes later, it's still this long chain of people who eventually were apprenticed to Jesus, who were looking at the type of people he would have us become. And so I think we start out in both the Beatitudes and kind of these first little section of the chapter of Jesus explaining, this is the type of person I want you to be. So I'm going to read the Beatitudes and then read kind of what he wants us actually to do with that again. So seeing the crowds, he went up on... Hang on, let me get my glasses. Seeing the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him. And he opened his mouth and he taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So again, the reminder here is this thing he's going to teach, this way of being in the world, this apprenticing ourselves with this master specifically. This is not for the winners. This is not for those with the resources. This is for those who ache for a different way of being in the world, for those who are considered meek, those who are considered losers, those who are not going out and conquering things, but in fact, bringing peace into the world, those who are going to be misunderstood and despised even at times because they refuse to call good the things that are not valuable to God. And so the invitation there in the Beatitudes is, I think, this is a way of being, this is a set of teachings that is for ordinary losers like us. And what are we called to do with these things, despite the fact that most people would overlook us and not really be that impressed? And yet, what Jesus tells about these new disciples and those of us that are in the chain that are still following, you're the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world, a city set on a hill that cannot be hidden. Nor do people see a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand. It gives light to all in the house, and in the same way, let your light shine before others, so they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. These new people that Jesus is in the process of training, of transforming, which of course will be ultimately the transformation will be made with his death and resurrection. But these new types of people have a job as well to show what God is like, to invite the world into a blessed, very different way of being, right? I still read this and get a little embarrassed. I can find myself at times in the Beatitudes. I'm a loser in a lot of ways with the Beatitudes, but then coming back and saying, you're the salt of the earth, that which purifies, that which preserves and make things better. You are light that shines on darkness and shows things that they are. That doesn't sound much like me most days. I would not mistake myself for a good religious person, for a light to the world, etc. And I think at that point, Jesus is, kind of giving a flash forward, saying, here's where this thing is headed. Okay, now let's get into the nitty-gritties here. And he's next going to talk about fulfilling the law. He's not scrapping what came before. And that pattern of, okay, here's kind of what you've heard, but here's what I'm going to do with it. It has a really important kind of pattern that is going to follow as he continues to talk to the law. And then structurally, after he talks about the law and this kind of pattern of exposing what our hearts are like and why we need God in it, he's going to move on to what he's going to later call, the greatest commandment of all, when he's asked, what's the greatest commandment by one of these lawyers? And they say, well, it's to love God and to love others. And so the sermon, the next chapter, is basically about different ways we can express love for God. Excuse me. And then the final chapter is going to be different ways we can express love for people. So again, we need to know what place our heart is in, what God has wanted to do with it. And that's what I think these next sections of the law are. And so each of these sections is going to kind of do the same thing. So you've heard it said of old, you shall not blank. So murder. And whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you, everyone who is angry with their brother is liable to judgment. He's going to do the same thing with lust. You've heard it said, don't commit adultery. I say to you, everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery. He does it with divorce. He's going to do it with the oaths we take and retaliation and loving enemies, right? Big, hard stuff to do. And I think the pattern is doing the same thing. Again, your lawyer is going to read this and say, okay, don't commit murder, don't commit adultery, don't do bad stuff, right? And as long as I'm short of that, and on first pass, it seems like what Jesus is saying again and again is, okay, well, here's the standard. Well, guess what? I just raised the standard. I made it that much harder in a lot of ways. And I think what Jesus is doing is, like many a good artist, like a good punk rocker, like I used to enjoy very much, he's trying to shock people. He's using this kind of hyperbole, not to say that we shouldn't, that it's okay to murder or it's okay to have this filthy anger in our hearts. He's each time exposing the root. Like, look, you cannot pretend just because you didn't murder or commit adultery that the root of those problems doesn't exist in your heart. It's not that you haven't managed to kill somebody. That same anger, that same disdain still lives in your heart. He's using kind of these shocking statements to expose people the root problem, what is actually in their heart that could potentially grow someday into a gross, obvious act, a gross, obvious sin like murder or adultery or breaking vows, fighting with enemies, etc., right? And so I think each time that this happens, we're going to find ourselves in the same place, our heart exposed and saying, you know what? I've never killed anybody, but the same thing that same seed that could eventually grow into a murder, I already find in my heart. I think it is going to cast us again and again into this same place of feeling like, oh, there's this ugly thing at the core of who I am. And it's not going to be something like we cannot by sheer effort, by trying hard, simply remove those seeds. There's things embedded in my heart that I'm going to need help with. And I think that that is very intentional, especially when you come to the end of these statements like turning the other cheek, right? Don't retaliate. If somebody hurts you, you turn the other cheek. You let them continue to abuse you. Shocking statement that people still try to get to squirm away from, right? Believing it. Loving your enemies, asking blessing and good things on those who hurt you and those who mistreat you, right? These are things that are beyond humanity to do their own. And that is the reason that this whole section ends with us kind of hanging like, and it says, therefore, you must be perfect or whole or complete, just as your heavenly Father is perfect or whole or complete. And so we're left hanging in a lot of ways, knowing we cannot get there by effort. We cannot get there with this lawyer mentality, right? All these things that Jesus has shocked and exposed, these seeds of all kinds of filth and sin that he has created, are things that I need help with. I am in this place where I recognize like I cannot by sheer effort, by sheer trying, by sheer wanting to remove those things from my heart. And that's exactly the place I think Jesus wants to find us as we go into considering what it looks like to love God and to love others. That's going to be one of the major, just themes of Jesus' life, that we, of course, need help. We, of course, need to humbly submit that I can't do this thing on my own. I need what you are willing to do both on the cross and in the resurrection and in daily empowerment of wisdom and strength through the Holy Spirit. The Sermon on the Mount, I think, is going to force us not to pretend like things are okay. And it is going to show us that there are standards, not impossible standards that, if we try really hard, we can do, that God's expectation is rightness among people, rightness between God. And I find something very different in my heart. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Those are the ones who are going to trust God and say, God, I can't do this. I can't help it. The Beatitudes start this thing off because this is for ordinary losers like me, people who recognize the need they have of God. And God is so willing to heal and embrace and transform us. And that's what the rest of the Sermon on the Mount is going to be about. If you want to see what kind of a person God intends to make us into, we need to look at this seriously. And I think that's the problem we tend to have with the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes. We look at this and it's like, man, that would be so beautiful if I was the kind of person who could truly love my enemies, who could truly turn the other cheek when I'm abused, who could not objectify my sisters, the kind of person who is not going to retaliate, etc., who's not going to have anger and disdain and desire violence on others. I wish I was that kind of a person. And the Sermon on the Mount is saying you're going to be, if you trust me, if you go into this long, slow process with me, if you continue to meditate and look at these things, this is the person I'm in the process of making you be. And so I think the challenge for us a lot of the time is feeling caught between not this undoable ideal, but actually trusting that this is who God is transforming us into be. These kind of shocking people, these people that I don't see a lot of in my own life right now, but that is where I think God is heading with this thing. And do I trust God with my inner being, with my heart and my soul enough that if he says things have got to go, things that are deeply embedded that I know my own efforts are not going to be able to get rid of, that healing and the transformation into this kind of a person, which I wish I could be. I wish I could be more like this person. And God's response again and again is, you can. I desire you to be. Trust me. Come on this journey with me. Let me transform you into that kind of a person. So, yeah, Sermon on the Mount, I love. It makes me nervous. But at the end of the day, hopefully it teaches me to offer up my heart yet again, say, God, I do want to follow you. I want to be this kind of a person. I want to be following this way in the world. That's not where I'm at right now. So I'm going to trust you with this, and I'm going to follow you on this journey to hard places, no matter what it costs me in the end.